I might have mentioned this in a previous episode, but Ozone as a studio, as a management company, and as a label was sort of owned or at least managed by four different individuals. That was Amici, who is most known for being company flow and Run the Jewels' manager these days, but has done a lot of different ventures within the music business since then. At the time of Ozone, he was managing like concurrently like Saul Williams, Mike Ladd, Antipop, Mr. Lift, Company Flow, Sonic Sum, um, probably others as well. Certainly others. A lot of other people that ended up on releasing things on the Ozone label. Um, Vassos, who was the engineer that really taught me the ropes post schooling, was another part of it. A gentleman named Brett sort of did a lot of like the more pop sort of pop and rock or pop rock. It depends on kind of like your point of view. But it was sort of like the parts of Ozone that were intended to, get signed to major labels. And that was sort of his deal. And then there was Mark, who really did a lot of the web design, graphics, things like that. Early days of the internet, of course. So saying that, at a certain point, those four guys decided. I don't know the exact reason why. I can only imagine it's because money and things weren't working out or whatever. From what I understand, all four of them, um, I think they all attended University of Michigan together. They're not all from the Midwest. I don't even know if any of them are actually from the Midwest, but I know that they all went to U of M. And I believe that the story goes that they met there, and at least as I understood it, being, let's see, in 2000 I would have been 22. So at least 21-year-old me understood it that they all met um, at University of Michigan and decided to start this label and management company and move to New York and build a studio. So setting that up, eventually they decided to dissolve it, and it was a big education in music for me. Not just the last day, but like the entire like closeout of that.
Was the shutting down, was it gradual? Like, was it one of those things where like they tried to keep things quiet, or were they communicating things to people within the studio and things just to keep everybody in the loop?
Oh, I mean, the thing that's important to remember is like a couple of people lived there. Brett lived there in his office. There was an artist who's still an active artist, a guy named Don DeLego, who actually played guitar on Pigeon along with this other guy named Steve Hamilton. And Don did a couple of other appearances. I think he played the guitar on he did, in fact, he played the guitar on Little Johnny on I think the song is called Be Aware on Little Johnny, but it later became Arise from Lift. And the Arise version doesn't have the guitar playing on it from what I remember, but the version that's on Little Johnny does. Anyway, so he lived there too. There was like this weird, like if you kept walking past a studio, there was like this back corner that had like this little storage room that like he turned into a bedroom. Yeah, that was interesting. So like, it's all young guys. I mean, I should set up the building itself too. But to answer your question first, to take it back and then go forward, like, yeah, I mean, because of the nature of the fact that people live there, Mark lived there too. So Mark and Brett lived there. Vassos didn't. Amici sometimes would crash, but I think usually he was out. At least by the time I was working there, and because they were there from like 90, I think they started in 96 or 97. Definitely by 97, they were there, and then I came in early 99, and I left mid to late 2000. Well, we all left mid to late 2000, but that was the end of it. So yeah, I mean, the nature of the fact that everyone lived, well, that a lot of people live there made it so that there was a gradual aspect to it. and coordinating the equipment, which we'll get into a little bit later too. Um, other a lot of people had to know and needed to know, and our studio business, as it were, in terms of like out incoming clients that weren't part of Ozone management and weren't part of what would become Jux later. We had to slow it down and start turning work down and letting people know there wasn't going to be a studio there until X amount of time. So it was gradual, but a lot of it was saved for like the last week or so in terms of like the main move.
Was that just something that was happening, you know, concurrently with like, finishing off things that needed to be finished musically before the studio was closed, and then at the same time tearing down equipment and moving it?
Ozone Studio was in downtown Manhattan. It was at an address called 62 Pearl Street. And if if you've heard like New York Telephone, I did a song called Pearl Street. And that's basically that song is sort of about like closing down Ozone. And I, being a Staten Islander, have a lot of familiarity with downtown Manhattan because that's kind of like the first area you get to see when you go into the city because the ferry dock's right there. So when I was working there, I had already, in my younger years than that even, I had worked as like a runner at the stock exchange. So I was familiar with downtown, and so it all was perfect. It was like it was all meant to be. Like, I told the story in the past about how I ended up getting the job at Ozone, or the internship that became basically a part-time job. Um, but yeah, the location was it was like, exactly where I needed it to be at that time in my life. And so that being said, it's kind of a unique location for a studio because it's downtown financial district. And it was a third floor walk up. First floor was this just shows you how long ago this is. The first floor, some guy rented out like the little lobby. Like it was basically like almost like a brownstone, but like for commercial. Like so it was like a small little I mean it's still there, but like it's a small little space. And in the front entryway where like the super or whoever it was probably kept their shit, they rented out like a little bench to a guy that would shine shoes. So there was
Mm.
like a shoe shine guy in the front entrance. Then you would go up the stairs to the second floor. And when I was there, there was a couple living there. They just had dough or something. Because back then, if you were living in a space that large, I mean, you had to really have some money, even more so than today, I think, to some degree. But what I was told is the lore is that the second floor used to be sort of like a brothel. Um, and they would just have like people like these random brokers and people from Wall Street would come, and they would often like be asleep upstairs and people would come knocking on the door like looking for whatever random person that they were looking for. That stopped by the time I was there, but that was sort of the early days. At least that was the story I was told back then. Then the third floor was where Ozone was, and you would walk in. There was, it was kind of like I don't know if they call it like a railroad style kind of place. Like you'd walk in, and then everything was kind of lined up to go straight. And so you'd walk in the front door, and it was Amichi's office, and Basis's office, and then Brett's office, and then Mark's office. And then you would walk down the hall past the kitchen on this side of you, and then go straight down into the studio that was kind of like built. And if you went to the left from there, you'd be in the control room and then a mic room. And then across the hall from that was like a drum room where you could record like full bands. And then if you go further down around this weird cubby, that's where Don lived. And so that was the studio. That was what it was.